Welcome to the first session on interaction design. This course is supported by NPTEL, which is National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning. My name is Abhishek Srivastav and I am your instructor for this course. Since this is our first session, our first interaction, I assume that you all would have a lot of questions in mind. Questions as big as, what is interaction design, what is the process behind creating interactive products, how do we design products to suit requirements of different user groups across different domains of applications. While these questions are interesting, but there are some very basic questions also, which I am sure some of you have that as well. Some of these very basic questions are, what is interface? Is it very well defined? What is interaction design? What are different perspectives of interaction design? So I think it's good to have questions, because when you are learning new thing and you have questions in mind, it helps the process of learning that particular subject. So I would encourage you to keep these questions in mind, and also, if possible, write them somewhere in your notebook so that you can revisit them whenever required. Let me begin this course by telling you a short story. The protagonist in the story is someone in his mid-70s. He has been using mobile phones for at least 15 years now. He uses one of the phones that you are seeing on the screen with hard keys, a smaller screen, a set of buttons for supporting navigation through different windows while he is interacting with the phone. This, as he calls, is his favorite phone. But unfortunately, his phone is getting more and more messier, to an extent that with lowering speeds of the processor, he can no longer do very basic functions like storing a recently dialed phone number. Or his phone is also not responding with that much of intensity to his inputs. On realizing this, one of his near ones recently gave him a sleek, modern looking phone. The other phone that you see on the screen, that one is the one which is a new gift to him. This phone has the reputation of being called one of the best user-friendly phones available in the market. It has got a touch-sensitive screen which is very big compared to the earlier phone that our protagonist had. He can actually touch different icons on the screen and can initiate different applications. However, within the first few interactions with the phone, our protagonist feels surprisingly somewhat otherwise. He feels that the things are not in his control on his new phone. He finds it difficult to perform even certain essential tasks like making a call to a contact from the list, or sending an SMS with the new phone, or even picking up a phone. After a few days, he decides to get back to his old phone again. Let us question what this story suggests us. Someone being able to use a phone, and someone finding it really hard to use another phone. So this story tells us some very basic but essential aspects of interaction design. The first one is that there exists variation in preferences across different user groups. These preferences are functions of several different attributes. So for example, someone's prior experience with technology, someone's education, someone's peer group, someone's age. All these are actually different factors that contribute to variation across user groups. Second, that no one design fits all. And here in this case also, you can see that you have a phone which is being claimed as a phone that would be fitting to all. That is not really happening. However, essentially, if you see, this story is about how different users use technology at hand. Our assumptions that they would use technology in the same way tend to fail. How do they interact with different interfaces? The answer to this question can be very, very different for each one of us. Unlike other objects, interestingly, interfaces are meant to support us, conduct different tasks. A single computer, for example, can be used to perform calculations, to create documents, to share documents, to access information over internet, and also to create and share media like pictures and images and videos. It is therefore quite relevant to design these interfaces better, and that is why perhaps we should look at interaction design somewhat deeper. Well, that brings us to another interesting point. We cannot really imagine interfaces and interactions in isolation. It is not possible to kind of imagine these two things in isolation. Each possible interface which is promising its user group a set of tasks is actually meant to be finally used by the users. And users use interfaces by interacting with them. For example, your word processor is an interface where you create documents by using different interface widgets like menu or even toolbar. So you have these interface elements that lets you accomplish a task using word processor as an interface. And each one of us, if you see, have slightly varying patterns of using word processor. Such a connection between the interface and interactions that it offers would continue to exist even if you use a computer or an online portal to help with shopping, a smart robot, a smart thermostat, or something handheld like your own health monitoring wristband. You may feel that we are arriving close to understanding the meaning of the word interface. Well, yes, of course, we are approaching to that area, but its meaning can be quite deceptive. So what is an interface? The word interface comes from two different Latin words. The first word is inter, which means between. The other word is facies, which means surfaces. So the simplest interpretation or understanding of this word interface would be a surface between two surfaces. But if you ask a tailor, he may interpret it as an additional layer of clothing that is put between two layers of clothes or fabric to provide an additional attribute, something like strength. So for him, if you see this word interface and its definition, a surface between the two surfaces, even that qualifies as an interface. Let me give you another example. In carpentry, if you are using a glue between two different surfaces of wood to join them, would you call glue an interface? So the phrase that interface is a surface between two surfaces seems quite generic. It is still not very specific. So we need to see this particular phrase in the perspective of interaction design. Let me ask you to consider two more cases. And let us begin by something which is more familiar to us. So what you see on your screen now is a very familiar place for all of us. It is Earth. We know it's a three-dimensional spherical object, but can you manipulate it? If you make your first attempts towards manipulating Earth, you would come to another representation of Earth, which is two-dimensional in nature. So what you see on a screen is another representation of the Earth, which is two-dimensional in nature. That is what we call map. However, if you still think that you need to manipulate it further and it is still not for manipulation as you imagine, you can still do it better. And that's where you have the third interface. You have the third object on the screen, which looks very much familiar. That is what we call an interactive map. There you can zoom in, zoom out, you can select a place, you can know specifics about that place. So you see that you would find it really impossible to interact and manipulate an object as big and massive like Earth but it is very much possible to interact with the representation of the earth. Okay, that is another understanding that we are arriving at. Let me ask you to come to another case. Okay. So, what you are seeing on your screen now, on one side you have the engine of a car, and on the other side you have a human agent. Okay, so if you consider these two things, the engine of the car and the human agent, I ask you a very basic question: can you drive the car? Can you drive the car by simply using the engine of the car? In fact, you do that. But the question is again the same: if you were to pull out controls out of the engine, which is like so many pipes going here and there and so many machinery in place, so many control equipments in place. If you were to pull out controls from there and you were asked to drive the car, can you drive the car? I think the answer is no. No, I cannot drive the car because I cannot simply use engine to drive the car. Okay. So, what is the problem? The problem is that your engine and human agent, if you see both of them, they are like two black boxes. They just have no way of communicating with each other. So, there are two black boxes, does not matter how far or how near they are, they will not be able to communicate or join with each other. Okay. So, let me suggest you to move to next screen. What you are seeing between these two black boxes is the dashboard. Okay. So, now we have a dashboard and we certainly are in a very familiar state of mind. We all have been driving cars by sitting behind our dashboards, where we have a steering, we have speedometer and other controls towards our left or towards our right. And yes, that is how we drive the car. So, if the same question is asked again, can you drive the car? Your answer would be big yes. Okay. So, what is happening here? Point is, you have something like a dashboard in between these two black boxes, which is making it possible for these two black boxes to communicate with each other. So, for a while, let us still not call it as an interface. We will arrive that understanding a little later. So, for a while, we have kind of solution to our problem. We have a dashboard, and as a human agent, as human beings, we are pretty comfortable with the dashboard, and there is no need to look into the engine of the car to drive the car. Okay. So, now if we ask the same question again, what is an interface? We can say the following, that the interface is a double-sided layer standing between two distinctly different systems or things. It builds up through the representation of the surfaces. So, do you remember that example of Earth, the interactive map? The interactive map is actually the representation of the map. So, an interface builds up through the representation of surfaces. Each side of this interface is designed to face its mating medium. Now, I ask you to remember and recall the example of the car dashboard. On one side of the car dashboard sits the human agent, and so the dashboard looks pretty much like something that we can all make sense of. But on the other side of the dashboard is the engine, and if you happen to look at the other side of the dashboard, you will find that it is actually a puzzle. Okay. But the interesting point is, each side of the dashboard is designed to face its mating medium. So, in a way, it helps the two sides connect to each other or to join, and that is our fourth point. If you were to arrive at a summary of what is an interface, we can say the following, that a user interface is a specific kind of interface, in which a human being can interact with a man-made object in a way that is reasonable for both. Okay, I think that's a pretty good understanding of what an interface is. Let's again try to arrive at some more objective understanding of these interfaces. So, you have two different sides of this interface. Remember the car example? Car dashboard, one side the human agent, the other side the machine. So, if you were to create a line that divides the machine side and the human side, you would arrive at the following. So, on your screen you see that on the side facing machine, you have inputs and outputs being laid out in an appropriate manner. And on the side facing the user, in order to make it convenient for the user and to perform better with the interface, or rather with the machine, the interface side facing the user has functions, controls, a lot of information in the way it can be understood. And that is where that line, if you can name that line is called user interface. You may have noticed that I have been using this word interaction for at least 4 or 5 times by now. So, obvious question to ask is, what is interaction? It is also an interesting question, because if you go across certain books on interaction design, you will find that finding the meaning of the word interaction is a very hard task. In fact, you would have a lot to read on interaction design and how people interact with computers or with anything else, but what exactly is the meaning of the word interaction is a little harder to know. And that is where I want you to come to the next slide. You may notice that since the beginning of the 20th century, earlier in 1901, we have the first definition of this word interaction. It appeared in the Dictionary of Philosophy and Psychology in 1901, and it says, the relation between two or more relatively independent things or systems of change which advance, hinder, limit, or otherwise affect one another. So, this is interesting, because here the idea of interaction is understood in terms of reciprocity, which is mutual or reciprocal action or influence across two different systems. So, if one of the two systems is able to influence the other and the other system is able to influence the first system back, then there is a reciprocal relationship between these two systems, and we could say that there exists an interaction between the two systems. But again, as the problem we have seen that some of these definitions are, especially the word definitions, are pretty generic, and we have to arrive at an understanding of their definitions with respect to human computer interaction. And speaking historically, it is only in 1960s that we receive a more nuanced understanding of the word interaction, and in specific context of human computer interaction. The decade 1960s is an interesting decade, because in 1960s for the first time we arrive at an understanding of interaction in terms of communication between man and machine. That was a new knowledge for a lot of us. And in 1960 in particular, we have an essay by J.C.R. Licklider, and the title of the essay was Man-Computer Symbiosis. It is for the first time that he imagined that there could be a symbiotic relationship between the man and the machine, or to be specific, between the computer and the users. The aims of this relationship would be that the problem solving would happen through thinking along with the computer. Imagine the interfaces which might have existed across the same time and a little earlier. You have to be very clear in terms of what the problem itself is and how do you solve it. So, what are the steps involved in solving, that also has to be brought into clarity before you come to interacting with the computer. But with this essay, what he proposes that this problem solving could be actually a very collaborative process with the computer. That is, you think along with the computer as you go towards solving the problem at hand. And that was a new understanding at that time. So, in this way, the computer helps you in the formulative stages and across the entire process of solving the problem. And that is what he meant by symbiotic relationship between man and the computer, or to be specific, as I say, between the user and the computer. So, the idea of real-time exchange of information is also very critical in this particular essay. What he said is that if you were to use a command line interface, you would have to actually type the command, and then that command gets accepted by the computer as an input to the computer, and then it processes that input and responds back in terms of a similar command line information. So this interaction, this particular way of communicating with the computer is prone to delays. It has a certain lag. There is no real-time exchange of information happening with the computer. But if you imagine with the graphic user interface, the computer responds to user inputs in real time, almost with a delay which is non-perceivable to us. Okay, which is almost saying that it's a real-time interaction between the man and the machine, or the user and the computer, and that also was a main point as listed in the man-computer symbiotic essay. In 1960s, as I said, this decade was very, very distinguishing decade, in the history of human-computer interaction. Why would that be the case? Because in 1963, we have first graphic user interface coming into the picture. Let me show you that. It was the interface titled as Sketchpad by Ivan Sutherland. He developed a light pen and almost a real-time interaction with the display screen. So he could interact with the display. He could interact with the computer behind the display by using his light pen on the display. He could draw line drawings and the computer would respond to his inputs in real time. So this was the first time when there was an alternate to command line prompts, and we had graphic user interfaces in our understanding. Something other also interesting, really interesting happened in 1960s. You have Douglas Engelbart proposing a design of X-by position indicator for a display system. It is what we call a mouse these days. His device, the mouse, could replace the light pen as proposed by Ivan in 1963. And now, by the end of 1967, we have the very basic elements of graphic user interface in place, a graphic display which is responding to in real time to the user inputs, and a hardware device like mouse which is helping the user to point out a particular portion on the screen. So in fact, by the end of 1960s, we have a matured understanding of the word interaction. As you can see on your slide, the interaction is now seen as a very systematic process whereby user performs an action, the computer senses that action, the system state changes, as if computer was showing something or it was doing something. As a result of that action, the state of the computer changes, and then it communicates that change in state to the user back. So in a way, it is a real-time man-machine communication, real-time user-computer communication, and that is what our understanding of the word interaction is in the context of human-computer interaction. Let us now move to the next question, which is, what is interaction design? I put forth before you three different definitions. The first definition, that an interaction design is about creating artifacts that are computationally empowered to provide interactive capability. The artifacts are designed to be used or experienced by people. We call this the use activity or experience activity that surrounds the artifact, in which the design artifact is a resource for carrying out the activity. So I think in this definition, you see that a lot of emphasis is being laid on experience, use activity, and designed artifact which is computationally empowered. So if you walk across the corridors of a design school, you would find that a lot of people would be questioning, what is interaction design? We interact with products all the time, and what is so new about it? Well, this definition, if you see, it clearly says computationally empowered artifacts. So next time if you have a question like that, I encourage you to use that very specific phrase which says computationally empowered artifact. Okay, so let's read it once again. Interaction design is about creating artifacts that are computationally empowered to provide interactive capability. The artifacts are designed to be used or experienced by people. We call this the use activity or experience activity that surrounds the artifact. in which the designed artifact is a resource for carrying out the activity. So, I have actually bold marked certain phrases in this definition, which I would encourage you to keep those in mind. Let us see another definition. Interaction designers strive to create useful and usable products and services. Following the fundamental tenets of user-centered design, the practice of interaction design is grounded in an understanding of users, their goals, tasks, experiences, needs and wants. Can you spot out the difference between the two definitions? I will show them once again to you. This is the first definition. Focus on the screen, look at the bold typefaces, point out the keywords, and now move to the next definition. Again, look at the bold typefaces, point out the keywords, and try to find out a difference. The difference is, the first definition is trying to define interactive artifact and what people are doing with that. So, there is an explicit mention of use activity, experience activity. But if you see in the second definition, it is more from a practitioner's perspective. That is why the first phrase itself says, interaction designers strive to. So, it is in a way, it is more practice oriented, it is from a practitioner's perspective. The first one was more you can call it a more definition oriented, discipline oriented definition. While these two, both of these are important, because as you can appreciate that this particular subject is very much in an application zone. It is an applied subject. So, we need to keep both these definitions in mind. One which is more discipline oriented, the other one which is practitioner's response to the discipline. So, how does a practitioner does that task? So, let us read it once again. Look at your screen. Interaction designers strive to create useful and usable products and services following the fundamental tenets of user-centered design. The practice of interaction design is grounded in an understanding of real users, their goals, tasks, experiences, needs and wants. Clearly says who is doing what. Interaction designers, usable products, the process is user-centered design, and it is grounded in an understanding of users. So, you need to know your users, their tasks, their goals, their needs and wants. Okay. So, let us now look at another definition. So, it says that interaction design is the definition and design of behavior of the artifacts, environments and systems, as well as the formal elements that communicate that behavior. Interaction design seeks first to plan and describe how things behave, and then as necessary to describe the most effective form to communicate those behaviors. If you can notice, the first paragraph is about what interaction design does, and the second paragraph is more process oriented. It tells you a bit about the process. So, it says first to plan and describe how things behave, and then choose effective form to communicate those behaviors. So, the second paragraph is clearly indicating the process that one needs to consider, while the first paragraph is that what interaction design is about. So, I would encourage you to revisit these three definitions. They are very interesting definitions. They give three different perspectives. Let us summarize. On your screens, all the three definitions are shown, with the difference that now what is shown, what is highlighted are the phrases that we have been using in these definitions, which are key phrases. So, in the first definition, you have key phrases like creating artifacts, interactive capability, used or experienced, people, use activity, designed artifact, resource for carrying. In the second definition, you have phrases useful and usable, products and services, user-centered design, understanding of real users, their goals, tasks, experiences, needs and wants. In the third definition, you have design of the behavior of the artifacts, environments, systems, formal elements, planning, first to plan, describe how things behave, and effective form to communicate. If you were to further group these key phrases, there seems to be few different groups which are emerging. And if you were to again repurpose these definitions and arrive at an understanding of interaction design, maybe you can use these following phrases as shown on your screen. So, interaction design is a goal driven design because you consider the needs of the users, you consider their goals, their task. It is about mapping tech and human capabilities. So, imagine that particular idea from the interface design. You have an interface between a machine and a man. So, that is why you need to match their capabilities. And understanding users is crucial, and you have to imagine all the scenarios of usage. Okay. So, while you are designing any product, it is good to brainstorm good enough number of times, or it is good to estimate all the different use cases possible with that application. And then you have, while you are doing that as a practitioners, you have to take design decisions. And clarity of communication. Remember that phrase, effective form to communicate those behaviors. That is what we meant by clarity of communication. And then you have to plan execution of task supported through the interface. I leave you with this understanding of interface and interaction design. Thank you.